You're listening to No Filter with Zack Peter, your go-to source for all the latest pop culture and reality TV tea, served fresh all week long. Now, let's dive in. All right, guys, today you're in for a very special treat. I have two guests that I've had on before, that I've collabed with before. I was just on their show, which is called Ask Two Lawyers. You're going to want to, I have a lot of questions for them, so I'm going to ask them a lot, but you're going to want to tune in. Listen on all your favorite streaming platforms. They're also on YouTube. They're here to help me break down all of this Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni legal saga. It has continued to unfold. I just want to be clear. We are taping this on Tuesday morning, February 18th. So we don't yet have the amended complaint with Blake Lively. It may drop during the recording of this, but just know all of the questions that we have is going to be more contextual background information. I have a lot of questions that I'm going to ask them about this entire case. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, hopefully we have an answer from Blake Lively soon. As you're listening to this, I'm on a plane to New York, so this is not live. I know we normally live stream in the mornings, but you're getting a pre-recording. As of right now, we don't know what the allegations Blake Lively has made. We just know that, or the allegations in the amended complaint are just yet, but we are hearing that it's likely going to be a 300-page document that is going to be filed by end of day Tuesday, February 18th. We'll see how that continues to unfold. But until then, let's welcome today's guests. I have on Stewart Albertson and Keith Davidson. Gentlemen, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Zach. Great to be on. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Zach.
How are you guys doing? Is it standard for us to not have a complaint yet? It's due today. I'm hearing that it may drop by the end of day today from Blake Lively.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. I was just, as you were going through your intro in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, they'll file it at midnight. On the e-filing systems that courts have now, you can, on most courts, I don't know how the Southern District of New York does it, but on most courts, you can actually file it up to 11:59 p.m. on the day of, and it's still considered filed that day.
But what would be the strategy in waiting until the last minute to file this?
They're working on it, and I'm sure they're wordsmithing everything at this point in time. They've probably got a team of lawyers and paralegals and everybody pulling together everything. I personally don't think it's going to be a whole lot different than the original complaint that's out there. It's going to be a story that's going to be told to the public at large, and it's supposed to hopefully address some of the PR failures that they've had in this, including Saturday night with Ryan Reynolds on SNL. But I think it's still going to be the same, that she made complaints, they were ignored, and then when finally they got tired of hearing these complaints from her, they retaliated against her. And that's going to be the theme. It's still going to be there, but it's just going to have a lot more facts in it. I think Baldoni's crew got out in front of this more quickly. The text messages that they put together and put out and filed in the court, the way they read is like a novel. It's devastating. And so this is going to be Lively's attempt to recast what's going on here, to bring the narrative back to her side and hopefully get some sympathy from people. Because right now she's losing 90%, I would say. Zach, do you agree with that?
Yeah, she's going down fast. The only people that are still, holding on to her are, Hollywood, or people that are attached to Hollywood, but it's only because it's more virtue signaling more than it is because they genuinely believe her.
And what about Taylor Swift? The silence is deafening. Hasn't she stood up for other female artists in the past under similar circumstances? And now we're just not hearing anything.
Yeah, when it's convenient for Taylor, she absolutely speaks out. But the interesting thing is, it's not just her not... Three things. One, we haven't seen her publicly align herself with Blake Lively at all. Two, we don't have her making any on-the-record statements about her connection to all of this stuff. And three, we don't have her issuing a statement in support of Blake Lively or believe women or any of that. Like, we saw that initially with a lot of people coming out in support of Blake, and then we see how that definitely came back to bite them in the butt. So we'll have to see what comes of it. But is this, if Blake Lively and her legal team had a strong case, do you think we would have seen it filed by now? The fact that they asked for an extension, they were given the weekend, and now we still don't have anything. Is that a bad sign for them?
Possibly. I mean, I think Stuart's right, though. I think that it's probably being wordsmithed. And I can just imagine, I mean, even when we do filings that are not public celebrity cases, you kind of go back and forth about the wording, make sure that you have what you need. But here, they're filing it for an ulterior motive. It's really not for the court, it's for public consumption. So I can imagine that it's not just the lawyers that have to review these complaints or amended complaint, it's all the PR people. I mean, it's the agents, it's probably Ryan Reynolds. I don't know. I mean, I sat down, I read through all of the attachments to Baldoni's lawsuit, which I think, Zach, you said that was your new favorite book. And I was reading through all of that stuff, and it's my new favorite book too. And part of that, they had the statement that Ryan Reynolds allegedly drafted where he wanted Wayfair to take responsibility for Blake Lively's bad publicity. So I can just imagine, what involvement somebody like that would have in an amended complaint. So it's probably just a nightmare to try and get. And the other problem you have is that when you draft something by committee, you kind of make it worse in some ways, but we'll have to see.
You do when there's too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And the other thing here is Ryan Reynolds really has put his fingerprint on this case. And let's not confuse the fact that he is a very good actor. People like him. He's good looking. He's handsome. He's fun to go and watch. But let's not confuse that with the ability to handle a legal strategy and to orchestrate a legal strategy. And part of the problem may be here, Zach, that they've got people in the kitchen that want to be cooks that don't know how to cook. They're very bright people otherwise in other endeavors, but they're trying to put their voice and their fingerprint on this. And sometimes the lawyers just have to stand up and say, enough. We're getting what we need here. And let's just move forward and get this thing filed. But ultimately, Zach, they're going to wait probably till the last minute just because they want to make sure. I mean, think of the fear that the lawyers have here. We lawyers, we look at most things as a cup half empty. We look at things as, how can this go wrong? How can this be mischaracterized? How is this going to be used against us in discovery? How is this going to be used against us in depositions, at trial, in front of a jury? And so we're trying to forecast for events that are way in the future and how these comments are going to be used against us. And so we want to be very careful in how we outline this. But I really do think what they're trying to hit here is they want to take back the narrative in this case. I don't know that that's possible, but that's what they want to do. And that's why it's so interesting to get this complaint and read it to see, are they going to be able to basically stop the flood of people that are on Baldoni's side and continue to be on his side, especially as they become more aware of the facts in this case.
Now, as attorneys yourself, what did you think of the SNL move, of them attending the event, walking the red carpet in full glam, posing for photos, making this joke? One, would you recommend this for your client should you be representing a case like this? And two, how would you deal with the fallout of this stunt?
Yeah, and I watched that live and I just cringed, like just watching the joke. I mean, it's one thing to show up. Okay, they showed up, they walked the red carpet, that's fine, you're living your life. But to do that joke now, I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, if my wife had been sexually harassed and they were serious and honest claims, I wouldn't joke about it. That'd be a very serious issue. So if it's true, if what Blake Lively's saying is true, then Ryan Reynolds joking about it is bad. If it's false, it's even worse because now you're making light of what you're doing to Baldoni. And so either way, whether Ryan Reynolds thinks this is a valid claim or not, it just seemed like it was in very poor taste. And I know some of the articles say that it looked like just kind of quick and cheap stunt, a PR stunt. And that's what it felt like to me too. So as a lawyer, I would never advise a client to go and do something like that. And Stuart, you made an interesting point about what would you do with that video. Now it's out there. What would you do with that video come time of trial?
Well, yeah, it would be something I would use in my opening statement. And I would show that this is how they responded to very serious accusations that are going to harm an individual for the rest of their life. Baldoni's not going to get over this. I mean, we talked with you last time, Zach, about how, people need to go away, resolve this case and go away for a while, and maybe they can come back later. But the claims that are being made against him, that he's a sexual predator, those are very strong terms. And those are, you want vindication. And I think that Brian Friedman was on a podcast, was it Billy Bush or something, where he just recently, as of yesterday, was saying that Baldoni wants to be vindicated. He wants a determination from the jury that he didn't do this. I'm not sure that goal can be met. I'm not sure a jury will actually say that. The only jury I've ever thought really came close to vindicating somebody was the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case. But that's rare. You don't see that often. And juries are fickle. You never know which way a jury is going to go. But back to your point, Ryan Reynolds, he needs to stop. But how, Keith, how do you and I as lawyers, how do you talk to Ryan Reynolds? How do his lawyers talk to him? He's a powerful man. Right. I mean, look at Baldoni. Zack, Baldoni was so nervous about texting him to begin with because he was such a big star, such an A-lister. And then, of course, when Baldoni didn't say apparently anything about Lively's weight, was just simply trying to figure out how best to do a scene and choreograph it and so forth. And then you go over to Blake Lively's house, Ryan Reynolds' house, and Ryan Reynolds walks up to you and says, "Hey, why the F are you talking about my wife's weight?" I mean, it's not a fair fight. Baldoni is a very good-looking guy. He's a great actor. He's very talented. He's not Ryan Reynolds. Ryan Reynolds is a big name here, and that is something that even the lawyers in this case have to deal with. How do you advise Ryan Reynolds not to go on SNL and do this skit? I don't think you're able to do that.
So my theory is that I think they're playing the Hollywood game and not the legal game. I think they know they're going to lose legally. So the best that they can do is show that they're unfazed by appearing publicly and doing this, The Voice, this bit on The Voice with Michael Bublé that Ryan Reynolds just did, and to appear at SNL and to make a joke of it. And I think even TMZ said that it was more of a statement to show that Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively will always be welcomed by Hollywood on the red carpet, where someone like Justin Baldoni's never going to be invited to an event like this. And to me, that just speaks about the ego, right? And even some of the legal strategies or some of the things that we're seeing play out legally feels like it's probably them, Ryan and Blake, that are wanting to push their strategy that probably goes against their legal team strategy or their legal team's advice. So at what point do you balance appeasing the client and then trying to win the case legally?
Yeah, it's hard. And, lawyers can give advice, but that doesn't mean that clients have to follow it. And, every lawyer deals with that. And, you can have the best of intentions as a lawyer, but the client ultimately gets to make the decision. And then when you deal with somebody, like you said, Ryan Reynolds, with a big ego, and he thinks he knows what he's doing, this is part of the problem of being successful. I think when you're a highly successful person, you think you know everything about everything. And at some point, you have to take a step back and say, maybe I don't know everything about everything. And maybe I need to listen a little bit to my legal advisors or PR advisors or whatever it is. But for him to go on that show, I mean, it landed very poorly. I thought it was very tone deaf, which is part of the entire problem that they're having from the beginning. And from what I can see, it appears as though a lot of fans felt the same way and thought that it was not a good move. And I didn't see a whole lot of positivity coming out of it.
So some lawyer, Zack, needs to be able to sit down with Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively in a private room where their egos won't be exposed, because look, these are very successful people. You have to deal with them a little bit differently, but somebody has to tell them the truth and risk the fact that they could be fired for telling these people the truth. And they need to sit down and figure out what is the best path forward. The problem is, and I think Keith is right, there are so many cooks in the kitchen on this one from different backgrounds, and they all have different goals. Boy, it's going to be hard to bring everything together to resolve this, but you do need one leader, in my opinion, some leader, doesn't matter who it is, that needs to step up and say, how do we fix this? Number one, fix the PR issue that's going on. And secondly, how do we resolve this case? And Zack, this is something we spoke about when you were on our show. I think this case can be resolved. I know everyone says, oh, this is impossible. You can't resolve this case. That's every case. Every case that's litigated is impossible. People's egos are involved. Emotions are involved. People are very angry. People want vindication. But every case is capable of being resolved. This case needs to go that direction. But right now, both teams are just killing each other. And as long as they're doing that, it's just going to be something that we're all going to sit around and talk about. And we're going to play Monday morning quarterback on all of this stuff. But this case needs to resolve. That's where it needs to head, in my opinion.
What do you think? So if this were your client and they wanted to do this SNL thing, but you still have to move forward in this legal battle, what would be your cleanup in this case to fix the damage that's been done?
Well, that's a tough one because you are going to have, that video is going to end up being played to the jury. I mean, I think Stewart's right. I think that that's going to be in the opening statement and closing statement, and you're going to see it. So I guess you're going to have to shift the focus back onto the claims, and that's where you get into the harassment claims. And, there's some talk about there is possibly some additional harassment claims sent to Sony, which we don't know if that is true or not. You're going to have to start shifting the focus of the case and looking at the part that helps Lively, and maybe anything you can find that's going to try to show that maybe Baldoni is not always being completely accurate either. And that's kind of the shift that you'd have to do as a lawyer to try to get around this.
I tell you, Zach, and maybe you know more about this than we do, but we did hear that there was 2 HR complaints that are floating around out there. One saying that Baldoni grabbed somebody by the butt or something along those lines. That's a gift to Lively's team, whether it's true or not, because that's at least something you have to start fighting back with. You just need one kernel to start, one step to start changing the narrative here. And if either one of these complaints have any credibility to them, it's going to hurt Baldoni's side. And again, that's where I'm saying, you got to resolve this case now. Baldoni's winning in the public opinion polls. He's winning, but it's something that if you get into a private mediation with a private judge who handled these cases for many years, and then these documents on both sides can be exchanged, there can be a meaningful exchange of documents. This is something that can be resolved and should be resolved, and it can be done confidentially, where not everyone's going to find out who was right and wrong, and people can try to go away for that 2 or 3 years we talked about with Zack earlier, and they can rehab their reputations. But one last thing on this, Zack, is based on what I've read and what I've seen, I think that Lively should take responsibility for the claims that she's made here. And taking responsibility, Zack, is more than just saying, "Oh, I'm responsible." It's actually making it right if you can. And part of that is, maybe I overstated some things. Maybe I was going through a tough time. And Zack, you talked about it as, I think you called it mommy brain. I'm not calling it that. I'm going to follow you on that, Zack.
Yeah.
You called it mommy brain. You came up with all kinds of reasons why she was having this emotional response to what she was going through. If there's a possibility for her to come out and say that publicly as part of a settlement, then that can give Baldoni at least the idea that maybe I have a determination that I did not do these things. And yet it doesn't have Lively saying, I totally misstated this. I lied. I didn't do the right things here.
I'd like to see the lawyer advising Blake to do that.
I don't think that's happening. For context, yes, I did say that I thought that her legal strategy or her strategy out of this should have been say that she wasn't in the right headspace during production. She just had a baby. Yeah. She was feeling insecure about her body. Her hormones were all over the place. She had mommy brain. Like there were so many different things, because then I think that can also be relatable to women that are looking up to her and feeling disappointed in her right now, that she would make false accusations that could potentially hurt the women's movement that we saw come forth with Me Too and Time's Up, and maybe try to course correct some of the damage that I think Amber Heard did or Jussie Smollett did with his false accusations. And so I think that, it's going to be really hard for her to navigate out of this. Even when I was coming up with the mommy brain theory, I was just like, I was grasping at straws of anything that she can do, distance herself from Ryan Reynolds, divorce him, say he was the one that was spearheading this and she needed to get away from him because he was controlling in her marriage to gain sympathy from the audience. Like, I was trying to twist myself into a pretzel every which way to save her reputation PR wise. And I doubt she's going to do any of that. I think she's really going to end up going down in flames.
Yeah, and that sounds like severe solutions, but that just denotes the fact that this is a severe problem. And how do you get out of it?
Yeah. So in reference to Stewart, you brought up these HR complaints. So there are 3 different complaints that have leaked online. And we don't know if they're real or they're not real. Brian Friedman just went on Billy Bush's podcast, Hot Mic, and kind of played coy with these complaints and didn't really seem like he was familiar with them, but made it clear that like Sony has said that they didn't receive any complaints throughout the duration of production. Now I've gone down a million different theories about like, are these real? Are they not real? What could the potential motivations be and the dates, and what their connection to all of this is, if they are legit, and if they're not legit, who put them out there and why. And so Brian Friedman's response to me he played a little too coy, which to me, I mean, as you guys know, you have to be prepared for every single scenario. And so the rumors are that these HR complaints had been circulating for some time, and that there are a number of various press outlets that decided not to publish them because they didn't feel like they could prove that they were legit HR complaints. And Baldoni's attorney, Brian Friedman, kind of played coy and didn't really seem to give them much light outside of saying maybe like that Sony doesn't have, claims that they don't have any record of this, but maybe like he kind of didn't fully dispute them, but he kind of just said that as far as they know, there's no legitimacy to them. Is it possible that her legal team would leak something like this in an attempt to sway the public?
I mean, it's definitely possible.
Is that even a smart possibility? Like, is that a smart play for them to try and, if they are playing the public perception game and they know that they're losing?
I mean, it's not dumb. I mean, I think that it's probably a good idea to get something out there that supports Blake Lively. And I think that when you hear that there was 3 other HR, let's just say for a moment that it was true, there's 3 other HR complaints against Baldoni. That does make you have to pause and say, maybe there's something more about Baldoni that we don't know. And maybe there's more evidence that we have to look out for. If these 3 HR complaints are false and you release them anyway, you're on Lively's side, maybe you're thinking, well, we're desperate. It's a desperate situation. We got to get something out there to change the narrative. We're not saying it's true because, it's leaking through sources where it doesn't show that we're saying it. Maybe you're just grasping for straws, trying to get something out there that will hopefully start changing the direction that everybody's thinking, as Stuart mentioned earlier. But it's a dangerous game. I mean, to leak something that you don't know whether it's true. And I did notice that Brian Friedman did not come out decisively and say, no, that's false. That never happened. Sony confirmed it never happened. And so you're thinking, well, okay, I know he's trying to be a little careful because the judge kind of scolded everybody and said, hey, don't be talking about the case too much. Although he did give an interview to Billy Bush on a podcast. So if you really were concerned about the judge, you wouldn't have done that at all. That leads me to think that Friedman doesn't know for certain. And so when you're put in a place as a lawyer where these HR complaints are swirling around, you don't know for certain if they're true or false. You haven't gotten to the bottom of it yet. You're going to dance around it a little bit. And I feel like that's kind of what Friedman did. He was playing it safe. He didn't want to come out and say absolutely not, because if they end up being true, then he looks terrible. So he was kind of doing a delicate dance, I think, around the subject for now until he figures out, are these real or are they not real?
Yeah. Hold up. Wait a minute. I want to cut in here very quickly. I know we're all riveted by this conversation, but I just needed to give some love to this week's sponsors. We got 2 of them. That's Rocket Money and BuyArray. Rocket Money, listen, I've been bragging about it, right? It's the start of a new year. And I told you that my top priority this year is to focus on my financial wellness. Well, thanks to Rocket Money, my goals feel achievable because they show me all of my subscriptions right in one place and help me easily cancel the ones that I've forgotten that I've been paying for. We've done that a number of times, right? We watch a new show, we sign up for this new subscription, and the next thing you know we forget about it and we're still paying. Rocket Money pulls together all of my spending across all my different accounts so that I can clearly track my spending habits and see where I can cut back. Missing out on a show that everyone is talking about isn't an option for me. I'm constantly signing up for all these different streaming services, and now I have an option to keep track of them with Rocket Money, which has been a game changer for me. They'll find all your unwanted subscriptions and even help you cancel them so that you never have to worry about them slipping through the cracks ever again. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. See all your subscriptions in one place. and know exactly where your money is going. For ones that you don't even want anymore, Rocket Money can even help you cancel them. Rocket Money has helped over 5 million users and saved a total of 500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/nofilter today. That's Rocket Money, ROCKET, rocketmoney.com/nofilter. I also want to give some love to my pals at BioRay. You know I love me some BioRay. I got my primary detox right here while I'm traveling to make sure that I'm staying healthy. And then obviously, I'm in New York, so I'm going to be imbibing a bit. So I want to make sure that my liver is strong and healthy. So I have some Liver Lover, a revitalizing liver tonic. All of their tonics are not only delicious, but they're put in these liquid tinctures that are perfect and easy to take. You can drip them into your coffee, your tea, your water. Sometimes I put them in a little Prosecco to kind of have a nice little healthy boost, or to at least not feel so guilty. But BioRay products are the plant medicine that you've been looking for, and they have products for the whole family: infants, kids, teens, adults. They even have an intimate line that you can check out. So if you want to give BioRay a try and boost your family's health this new year, then definitely head on over to bioray.com. That's BIORAY, bioray.com, and use code ZACK, ZACK, for free shipping. That's code ZACK, ZACK, at bioray.com. Head on over, lock in those savings, and get up on it. All right, guys, back to the show. And we'll ultimately see. I mean, we'll see if any of this is even referenced in her amended complaint. My thought is maybe one of the strategies was because it appears that there are at least 2 other women that were on set that maybe had complaints against Baldoni, that maybe this forces them to now come forward, because if it's being talked about and their names are floating around, they're likely now going to have to either go on record and say this is true, or now have to address it in some way, which, if there's more than one person accusing him, that only makes Blake's case stronger.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to take it. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, keep in mind, this is, a relatively new case. It's a couple months old. I mean, obviously, it's been building up for several years, but the public consumption of this case is just it's December of 2024, and then January things really kick off. Well, and I by the way, the facts as I read them, I'm on Baldoni's side. I'm sympathetic to him. But the question is, with these 2 HR complaints, what about previous work projects that Baldoni's been involved in? I mean, he's how old is Baldoni? Is he in the 40s or early 50s? In any event,
41, I think.
41. There's going to be other people. There'll be other facts, interactions that he's had, and that's why, again, everyone is, everyone's team Baldoni. It seems like at this point in time. Let's get all the facts here. I certainly don't like the feeling I get from Ryan Reynolds and what he's been trying to do on this case. He's a powerful guy. He comes off as a jerk, quite frankly, in the text messages that Baldoni's team has released. And Lively comes off as somebody that wants to come in and take over production and directing and rewrites and all of this. But we don't have the whole story here yet. And so maybe this amended complaint will hopefully lead us into there is more to this story. And that's why I think it's so important to take a look at it.
Yeah. So I want to take it back to the beginning, though, with the original filing. And that was back in December, just before Christmas. It ends up, I mean, in my opinion, it looks like there was a press release that was sent out, or at least an undercover sort of like tip to the press, because it spread like wildfire after the New York Times article came out. And that was this CRD complaint, which was filed in California. And to me, California was a very strange place to even file a lawsuit. And it's because the filing was in California, where the film was done in Jersey, and some of these meetings took place in New York. Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds live in New York. So what would be the motivation behind filing this complaint in California, given none of this happened in California?
So I put a lot of thought into that. And we looked at Civil Code Section 47 and then 47.1. And the interesting thing about 47.1 is it gives people in Blake Lively's position who are making sexual harassment claims, it actually extends the litigation privilege to them. The litigation privilege means that you can say anything you want in your allegations, and you cannot be sued for defamation. And so it gives people the freedom to come out and allege whatever it is they feel they need to allege, and you can't be sued for defaming somebody else that's a litigant in that case. But 47.1 extends that, and it gives that same privilege to anybody who has a sexual harassment claim, even if they don't file it. And so I'm thinking that has to be the strategy, is that it's such a broad statute in California to protect what people say in a sexual harassment complaint, even if it's not filed, that would be kind of the starting point that would allow you to file the claim, get the litigation privilege, and then you leak it to the press. You can't be sued for defamation is probably going to be their argument. I noticed in the federal lawsuit that Lively did file that she did include some claims under California law in the federal court complaint in New York, which you can do that. You can sue somebody in another state, like federal court in New York, and you can still sue them she's suing under federal law, but she's suing some of her claims under California law too. It's just called choice of law. Courts do it all the time. And I'm wondering, though, if she brought some of those California claims in federal court in order to bolster her litigation privilege claim. So I think there's going to be more on that argument in the future. And I wouldn't be surprised if they do something like a motion for summary judgment or something like that at some point in the future. We're way too early in the case for something like that to be happening yet. But stay tuned. I think there's going to be more on that in the future.
Now, and I know we chatted about this a bit on your show, the litigation privilege, that only sticks if you're making the claims in the actual legal document, right? It only protects you from defamation if it's the claim that you make there. But now that we're seeing that it was likely her team that leaked this to the New York Times, is it possible that that protection is now no longer valid because this did end up going to the press, even though she never went on record in the article? That's a really key point, is they somehow got this information. They somehow got, they claim thousands of documents and all of the text messages, and they combed through all of the evidence. They won't claim how they got that, and that's fair. They're not entitled to reveal their sources. But is she still protected if this was leaked by her team?
Possibly not. So every privilege has exceptions. Even the attorney-client privileges is probably the strongest privilege that we have, but even that one has exceptions. And so the whole point of the litigation privilege is that you're protected for doing official things with the court. But when you start using it and using information outside of that process and outside of the court, there are exceptions where the litigation privilege no longer applies. And that can be true, too, of the litigation privilege extending to sexual harassment claims. And the statute actually goes into some of that. If you're using it for malicious purposes, or if your claims are proven not to be true, you don't get that privilege. And so there's a number of different ways that there could be an exception to the privilege here. And that's the thing that was kind of interesting, is it felt like the claim to the CRD in California was made really just as cover so that they could leak it to the press and hopefully escape a defamation claim. And I think once you go outside that official channel of, I'm here doing something official with the government or with the court, but now here I am not doing something that's official to that. I'm over here talking to the New York Times. I think there's a really good argument that you now have gone outside of the protection of the privilege, and that shouldn't apply to you. So I think Friedman has a strong argument on that point, and we'll have to see kind of how the court deals with it ultimately.
What I found interesting too is there was an account on TikTok, I believe her name is Gouge. She noticed that in some of the media that was uploaded in that New York Times article, because when you upload a video or you upload an image, you can take that image and isolate it, and then it'll show you a URL. And the URL typically has the date in which that media was uploaded to the server. And so based off of those logs from the images and the video that was uploaded to the New York Times article, it showed that those images that media was uploaded prior to Blake Lively even filing her CRD complaint, which to me is a really if they can prove this in the metadata and that's all true, to me shows me that it appears, from my own, this is my own conjecture, it appears that Blake Lively and her team likely went to the New York Times, leaked all of this information, and then in their seemingly, again, my own speculation, collusion of trying to put this narrative out there, it appears that this was the strategy, was to file something that appeared like a lawsuit, like the CRD complaint, which, from my understanding, is a prerequisite to filing the lawsuit here in California, even though they ultimately filed federally in New York. But it seemed like it really was just to get the narrative out there, to make it seem like it was official, to protect them legally. The New York Times, I would imagine, is also going to fight to be protected legally because they have, freedom of the press. They have their own protections. They don't have to reveal their source. And as long as they are under the impression that the information that they're being given is true, they're protected, right? It's very hard to sue an agency like the New York Times for defamation. So it seemed like there was never an intention to move forward with the lawsuit. This was all just a game to manipulate the public to believe these things about Justin Baldoni and never actually bring forth the lawsuit.
Yeah, that'd be strong evidence if you could prove that the New York Times is uploading images for the article and creating things before the complaint's even filed, because they already know what's coming and they've already looked at the complaint as it is. That'd be some pretty strong evidence. And the thing that's unique about this case is normally it's impossible to get the sources from a reporter, but we know who the source is. It's Blake Lively and her team. So instead of trying to subpoena the New York Times, you just turn your attention to we'll just subpoena Lively and all her representatives, and we'll see what communication they had with the New York Times. There's got to be a trail somewhere. Somebody emailed something to somebody or texted something to somebody. And so one way or another, there's got to be evidence of how that information got over to the Times. And if it was before the complaint was filed, I mean, that's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I believe the date was filed December 20th and the article was published December 21st. But the dates of the uploading of the media was earlier in that month. And I believe one of them dates back to even October. So, and then there was there was a Reddit thread that has recently resurfaced that was published about 6 months ago. So months prior to this filing. And in this Reddit thread, it was a user that claimed that they had inside sources about what was going on the set of It Ends With Us. And apparently Blake Lively, from what they were hearing, was threatening that if Sony didn't give her the demands that she was asking for, then she was going to go to the New York Times and make these allegations against Justin Baldoni and that she had a source there.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's super incriminating because the timestamp of when that Reddit thread was published, again, was at this point, it's a little over 6 months now. But the fact that that was published online, nobody picked up on it at the time because nobody had any reason to believe this. But if this person had these inside sources and was claiming that Blake Lively was threatening to do this, and then ultimately that's what we saw play out, then that tells me that that's also, pretty incriminating against her.
Yeah, that would be devastating evidence.
Yeah, and I think Keith is right that you get that evidence from Blake Lively, and then you can develop your case against the New York Times. The New York Times, while they do have freedom of press and they have some privileges they can rely on, they still, I mean, it's supposed to be one of the preeminent news sources in the world, and they have to do their due diligence. And it doesn't look like, at least at first blush here, it doesn't look like a lot of due diligence was done. It looks like they just completely took the story, hook, line, and sinker, and went with it. And then, Zach, I'm not clear on this, but I read somewhere, I thought, that they gave Baldoni's team, or just Baldoni, just like less than 24 hours to respond to this before they were going to publish this. Is that accurate?
According to Baldoni, yes, he claims that they had reached out to him the night of the 20th, which I believe is when the CRD. Now, there's no confirmation as to when the CRD complaint was actually filed because, again, it's private, like it's confidential. The public can't just access that information. But my understanding, based off of what was reported, is that this was filed on the 20th. They reached out to Baldoni, I believe, at 10 p.m. on the 20th, according to his claims. It was 10 p.m. on the 20th, and they said, you have until noon tomorrow to give us your side or your statement. So they gave him a 14-hour window. And within that 14-hour window, it was overnight. 10 p.m. is not when you call up your attorney and you're like, hey, there's this New York Times hit piece that's coming out against me, and we need to issue a statement. And so I believe they did issue a statement, but the New York Times ultimately ended up publishing the article. I believe it was about 12 hours after they had initially contacted him, which was 2 hours earlier than the deadline that he gave him, which is why I believe he's suing the New York Times for promissory fraud and breach of implied in fact contract, is because they said that he had 14 hours to plead his case. And even though he'd already issued a statement, they ran the article earlier.
Wow.
So, I mean, which again, just doesn't seem like journalistic integrity if it's such a big story and you're only going to give the other party an overnight window that's less than 24 hours to respond to this.
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, I don't see, a proper reporter who actually wants to get to the truth of the matter going through all that. So I don't know what happened there, but it doesn't sound like it was fully vetted. That's for sure.
And I think it really was because they didn't think, I mean, come on, you have Ryan Reynolds, you have Blake Lively, you have WME, you have, their publicist, Leslie Sloan, who has a huge publishing firm. You have the New York Times. Like, I think they thought this really does feel like a case of David and Goliath. You had all of these all-star players that nobody was going to question them. Nobody was going to dig into whether or not this was legit because they're all such heavy hitters. I mean, Megan Twohey, New York Times, like that's, what you would take as top tier journalistic integrity right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is there any chance that she could get away with the defamation? Like, if she can beat the defamation claims by saying, well, I didn't leak this to the New York Times. I never went on record. And unbeknownst to me, maybe somebody else on my team coordinated this.
I mean, that certainly could be her argument. Would that allow her to escape liability? I suppose if a jury determines that that's the truth, that she wasn't the one who leaked anything, the Times somehow had an inside source at the California CRD who handed over the complaint and the Times ran with it. Sure. Yeah, I mean, that is a possibility where Lively would not be liable for that and the Times would. But it'd be kind of hard to imagine that it didn't somehow come from Lively's camp or an agent of Lively. And Lively would be responsible for all of her agents. So whatever a PR person does or a manager or a lawyer, that all goes back to the client as the principal. So, but you could construct some scenario where that is possible.
At least to protect her. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I would imagine her agents or her team would want to protect her at all costs. It's why, like, I can see them making that argument, but I just can't see that being realistically believable that she didn't have any sort of awareness or understanding that this was going down.
Yeah, that'd be pretty hard to imagine.
And it just seems too strategic, right? CRD complaint, California, confidential filing. But I think the most damning case against the New York Times is when Justin Baldoni filed his defamation suit against them. Their response was that they did their journalistic due diligence and that they reviewed thousands of documents that corroborated this information, which to me, I'm like, but if you did your due diligence and you really did review even all of these text messages, let's say you actually did that, then you would have seen the context and the additional messages in the threads that Baldoni's team then released. And you would see the altering of the text messages where they removed the emoji to change the context of the message to make it literal versus sarcastic.
I don't think this is the type of journalistic, curiosity that a person like Bob Woodward would have, getting to the bottom of Watergate. So, I mean, that's just my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong, but it did not seem thorough.
Or if it was thorough, it was intentionally misleading, which I think
is
bigger. Which, again, when it comes to a case of defamation, don't you have to prove that it was either intentionally misleading or completely reckless? Malicious.
Yeah, and and I guess if you put your shoes in somebody so prior to all this, you think Ryan Reynolds, fantastic, he's funny. You think Blake Lively, is a movie star. She would never manufacture something like this. So I suppose if you put yourself into a person's mind before all of this blew up, because I didn't know anything about Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively before this, really. I mean, I knew who they were and I've watched, some of their movies. But I guess if you put yourself in that position, I don't know Justin Baldoni from Adam. And so maybe you do believe them and they're like, this is what happened. It was terrible. You're like, oh my God, I can't believe it. So maybe coming from that angle, you could make the mistake of going too far into believing everything they're saying and not doing the due diligence that you probably should have done in order to make sure that what they were telling you was truthful.
I think there's also some text messages and communications out there where it appears that Baldoni and his team during the making of this movie, they were placating Lively. And so, they would apologize. They would agree to her 17 terms. They would agree to her 30 terms or whatever it was. And it also seemed as if that she would bring the complaint up multiple times, even after it had apparently been resolved. where they're apologizing, even though they don't really feel like they need to apologize. But because she's such a powerful person, she's refusing to, go out on the press circuit and push the movie. She's refusing to finish the movie. She's available when she's available. Sometimes she's not available. And I just think there was an asymmetric relationship here where Baldoni and his team had basically probably put their life savings into this movie, and they put a lot of energy and time, and they've got to finish it. And so they had to placate Lively. That's what I'm seeing from their side. Now, again, I would very much like to hear Blake Lively and her crew come forward and say, well, here are the rest of the text messages that you're missing. And let's lay those over the text messages we have from Baldoni that were filed in federal court. And let's see if there's some more context we can put to this. But right now, it looks pretty bad for Blake Lively, and that she was difficult to deal with, and they were trying the best to get her across the finish line so that she would finish the movie, number one, and that she would also go out and publish the movie. And then, of course, there were the issues with how she published it by trying to sell some of her trinkets along the way, apparently, and then she got upset about that as well.
Yeah.
Not even just her trinkets, her booze brand. Like, that's the crazy. Like, it was her shampoo, her hair care line, and then her booze brand, which people are like, this is a movie about DV. Like, these are serious allegations, and alcohol is often related with, like, that's, those are two things you don't want to put together in promotion. And she's telling everyone, bring your friends, wear your florals. And the audience turned on her for that, which is why so many people are like, the smear campaign was your own behavior that just got used against you in this case.
And I think there was some text messages with Melissa Nathan, and where they're talking about, we don't need to smear her. She does a great job on her own.
Exactly. And those are the text messages that were conveniently left out of Blake Lively's, presentation that Baldoni's team then brought as context of, like, they were, yes, you pulled apart this text message and this text message, but that thread had like 8 different messages or whatever it was that had more correspondence that added more context to that conversation. So when you isolate just those 2 messages and then that gets exposed, to me, that's super incriminating. And also, from what I've seen, I haven't seen any evidence to support her claims of harassment, and any evidence that she brought forth with claims for the smear campaign, which seems to now be more of her focus, those continue to kind of be debunked with the lack of context that was originally presented. So
yeah, I think so. And it's interesting because there was also a memo from Wayfarer in the exhibits to Baldoni's complaint, where Wayfarer sends a note to Sony saying, hey, we just want to remind you again, we've said it before, but we want to remind you, we have to be very careful about how we market this film. It's a very sensitive topic. And so it's interesting that Wayfarer understood that, but Blake Lively, and she was marketing through her company, did not understand that, obviously. And if they had just listened a little bit, they could have been well advised, but that didn't happen.
Well, then you take it a step further and you see the marketing that Ryan Reynolds was then doing for the film, where he's sitting down with Brian Sklenner, who's the other lead actor in the film, and they're doing like funny bits and skits. When Ryan Reynolds, and he even brings Hugh Jackman into it, and it's like, Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman are not part of this film at all. Like, Ryan's just married to Blake. Why is he even inserting himself into the marketing plan at all? I mean, you can arguably say he's trying to support his wife, but then for him to be making funny skits to promote the movie, again, takes away from the serious nature of what the intention behind the film actually was.
Yeah, absolutely. And Wayfarer was also concerned that, we don't want to give people the impression that we're making money off of domestic violence. I mean, that's not the message we want to send. We want to send that this is an important topic and we want to treat it respectfully.
Now, the latest thing that we saw come out was her team trying to pull phone records dating back 2.5 years at this point that they want to comb through and try to figure out if they can find. I mean, in my opinion, it's like, this kind of seems like a fishing expedition. 2.5 years seems like a really wide scope. This alleged harassment happened sometime in 2023, like mid to late 2023, early 2024 is when they were finally brought to light with Sony and Wayfarer. That, to me, it doesn't make sense as to why we're trying to fish back 2.5 years, unless it was to try and dig up. My theory was that it was trying to dig up dirt on Baldoni and his team.
Well, a couple things there. First of all, Discovery.
Do you think that one, the scope is too, like, do you think that there's even a chance that they could get that approved by the judge. And their claim was also that it's not necessarily the contents of the messages that they want, but just the logs themselves to see like how many text messages were sent and the dates and times of these messages to see if anything was omitted.
Yeah, a couple things there. I think Brian Friedman misstated the law, or maybe misstated. He's being a lawyer. He's advocating on behalf of his clients when he was on the Billy Bush podcast. He said that this stuff has to be narrowly tailored. And that would be true for bank records, financial records, stock brokerage accounts and those kinds of things. But here, I think that the claim for 2.5 years of text is probably warranted because you now have these potentially other HR complaints that are floating around. Zach, you're saying there's 3 of them. And so this would, if I was representing Blake Lively, I would be telling the court, they want to limit us to just conversations between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, or that are related to this particular case. Whereas we've now heard there's potentially HR complaints from other women out there saying that they somehow felt uncomfortable by somebody involved in the production. And we would want those text messages as well. And right now, the way that Brian Friedman is describing it is we want to narrowly tailor this stuff. We want to basically not give you everything that you're asking for. I think these are things, as lawyers, we are a bit on a fishing expedition. We do want to see the bigger picture. And while I wouldn't want anybody to see 2.5 years of my text, probably most people would be bored with 95% of them. It is invasive, but that's what lawsuits are, Zach. Lawsuits are invasive. You do not have an absolute right to privacy in all aspects of your life when there's a lawsuit involved. There are certain things, like I just said, that are protected, your finances and those kinds of things, but even those things can be reached under the right circumstances. So I think that Blake Lively and her lawyers, if these HR complaints turn out to have any credibility whatsoever, it's going to embolden them, because now they're going to say, not only do we want text messages, we want emails, we want all communications that have anything to do with somebody making a complaint, with Justin Baldoni talking about anybody making complaints against him. They're going to want these messages. But I certainly understand, if I'm in Justin Baldoni's shoes, I don't want people. I'm a famous person to some extent here. I'm not as famous as Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively, perhaps, but I'm famous. I'm in a movie. I'm well known. I don't want people seeing 2.5 years of my text. So a court can also issue a protective order and require that text messages are sent out for review. But the problem with this case is you're going to have leaks, because it's, you can have a federal judge saying, I'm going to really spank anybody if I find out that there's a leak. But man, it's hard to find out if there's a leak. But ultimately, in answer to your question, Zach, I don't think 2.5 years is that far. The question is the scope. And the scope in discovery is broad. It is not narrowly tailored in most cases. And so I think a judge is going to lean on the side of disclosure of text messages that would have anything to do with the subject matter in this case.
Yeah, although I would still, if I was on Baldoni's side, I'd still try to argue the right to privacy, which is what gives you that, narrowly tailored standard. But the problem with the right to privacy is it's not absolute. And I think Stewart's right that ultimately lawsuits are invasive. And so you're going to end up giving more text out than you want to. Now, the logs, I think, are different from the actual text. So if you're asking for the logs, I want to see a log of every text between Baldoni and his partner Heath, from the beginning of 2023 to now. I think you have a chance of getting those logs because, they're not disclosing anything. They're just disclosing when messages were sent.
Once you get those logs, what are you going to argue?
I'm going to argue that I want the texts that are behind them now.
And I think that's the intention. I think the intention is they want the logs to prove that there was probably a text message or two that was, deleted. And then they can say, well, we want to actually review the actual messages. Like, I think it is a fishing expedition. They're just playing it step by step.
Well, Zach, can you imagine? I'm just imagining here. I'm not saying there are text messages, but do you think Steve Sorowitz has any text messages that might be pertinent to this case? And maybe they're unflattering text messages. Maybe they're text messages that say horrible things about Blake Lively. And it could be that she is a horrible person. We don't, we'll let a jury determine that. But those, just all the people involved here and all the people that have been sued here, when you get sued, you have an emotional response to that. And you might fire off a text to somebody that you wouldn't want everybody in the world to read and consume.
Right.
Exactly. And I think that's what they want. And I don't think they want it because they think it'll help their case legally. I think they want it because they want the public to see it, because then it'll taint the public against them. And even if it's not like, even if he's like, Steve Sorowitz is like, let's take this bitch down. Like, let's say that's what he writes, and that's inflammatory, and that becomes a headline, and like that goes all over the place. I don't even think they need that. I think even if it's just an off-color text message that maybe has nothing to do with the case, but even if it's an off-color text message that could, especially coming off of cancel culture, there's still people that are salivating at their next big takedown, that if there are text messages that are unsavory from any of these people, that can immediately become a headline and ruin their reputation from a different angle.
Yeah,
especially for Baldoni, because he's come out, so in support of the feminine movement. If he has texts where he's saying, crude things about women, that could be hugely harmful.
Damaging. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a saying in the law that I'm going to get completely wrong, but it's when you have the facts, pound the facts. When you have the law, pound the law. When you don't have the facts or the law, you pound the table. Am I right in that?
Yeah.
And I think that, the reason you have three strategies there. So if you don't have the facts, you might have the law. If you don't have the law or the facts, just make a commotion. And I think that's what you're getting at, Zach, is they're trying to make a commotion, a sideshow, a straw man that will take away from all of these bad facts that they're dealing with the text messages.
I agree. It doesn't seem like they have any. And if anything, if she's telling the truth, then it shouldn't be that hard to prove that. I mean, if she was filing complaints and she was telling managers and agents, then it shouldn't be hard to produce those text messages saying, "Oh my God, Justin Baldoni just left my trailer and I felt really uncomfortable," or even later on, right? Like once it did become public, right? When they had this alleged all hands on deck meeting where Sony and Wayfair and Blake and Ryan, they're all present on this January 4th meeting that took place last year. Even after that, I would think then you can want to be even more mindful of keeping records of things. So to me, I just don't feel like if she had a strong case, she would have led with that. She would have led with her best foot forward, rather than right now, it feels like she's trying to scramble to put something together.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I mean, she definitely would have put her best stuff in the CRD complaint and the initial federal complaint. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, why would you need an additional several weeks to put together an amended complaint if you're confident in your case?
Right. Yeah. Or if you have the evidence already, if she had a string of emails from Baldoni where he's saying all sorts of vile and sexually harassing things, we would have seen it.
Or if she really did, because her thing was she tried to file HR complaints, and this was just a unique set where she didn't know how to, and which to me is like, come on, you're Blake Lively, you've been in this industry for how many years? There were reports that when she was on Gossip Girl that she filed a harassment complaint against a makeup artist and had the makeup artist removed from the set. So she's very savvy about knowing how to get things done in this world. She would have gone to SAG. There are a number of things she could have done should it really have been to the degree that she claims that it is. And that's not to say, and I understand there's no perfect victim. You're never going to have a perfect victim when it comes to, allegations of harassment. But if it really was to the degree that she's claiming that it was, then I would imagine she would have some emails with Sony trying to say, how do I file an HR complaint? Texting her assistant, can you please find out the formalities of putting together a complaint? Is it with Wayfair? Is it with Sony? I wouldn't imagine that all of those correspondence would be just verbal and not in any form of writing that can be producible.
Yeah, that's hard to believe. You'd think there'd be something. I mean, she has managers, she has agents, she has obviously an army of lawyers. I mean, somebody would have heard about something, and she managed to get 2 ADs fired off the movie, so she knows how to do that.
Yeah. The footage that came out that was published in the Daily Mail that shows that clearly is the most damning piece of concrete evidence that we've seen against her claim, where she says that Justin Baldoni creeped her out because they were talking in a scene where, they weren't in character. He kept breaking character and there was no audio, so there was no need for him to be talking at all. And then he leaned into her neck and he sniffed her and told her she smells so good. And it sounds salacious and incriminating. And then we get the drop of the actual footage. We see that there is audio, so we can hear everything, and we can see that a number of times she's the one that's breaking character and talking to Baldoni as herself and having them have an exchange a verbal exchange where they're not necessarily in character despite still moving and dancing together in this slow dancing montage. But then we also see as he leans into her that she says, "Oh my God, I'm sorry, my spray tan probably smells gross," or something to that effect. And he's like, "Don't worry about it, it smells fine." And they kind of like joke at it. And she's like, "Oh, well, you're just smelling my body makeup that smells good." And so you see that the exchange is very different. And you can even see that the second they yell cut, that he immediately disengages and his body language immediately gets out of character and he becomes back into director mode. That to me is the most incriminating piece of evidence we've seen get leaked publicly. If Blake were your client and that came out and you're now at that point where you're like, holy shit, I don't think that my client is being the most honest with me. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think that is one of the most damning pieces of evidence against her. And I don't think it's going to play well in front of a jury. It's not going to play well at her deposition. And, I've said this before, but really she needs to settle this case before she gets deposed, because based on what we know now, unless there's just something that we don't know that's unbelievable, which, like you said, I think we would know that by now, it'd be in the complaint, both with the CRD and her federal complaint. You have got to get this settled before you set for deposition, because you are not going to look good. And I guarantee you it's going to be a videotaped deposition, and you're going to be put under some very difficult questions, and you're going to be looking at this video and during your deposition, and you're going to be asked a lot of questions about it. So I think this is the point in time where you really have to think, what's the end game here? How do we get out of this? Because this is going from bad to worse, and we need to figure out how to extricate her from this situation. And the best way to do it is to try to find some way, somehow, to settle this case, as impossible as that may be.
Yeah, and Zach, juries don't like liars, and they don't like unrepentant liars. A jury will give you a lot of grace, in my experience, if you just come out and say, I made a mistake and I shouldn't have done that, even if you intentionally did something. So one of the things we as lawyers want to do is we want that impeachment moment. We want to get somebody lying in a case. And here it appears there was maybe an overstatement, or perhaps even a bald-faced lie that was made, because the evidence, the microphone's not lying, the audio's not lying. And so what we would want to do with that is we'd want to put that in front of a jury. And if we can get the jury to believe that Blake Lively lied at that moment, there's actually a jury instruction that we can have the judge read to the jury. The other side will fight to have that jury instruction excluded, but it will be included. And that jury instruction tells the jury that if you believe that somebody lied on one point in their testimony, just a single point, you are allowed as the jury to discount their entire testimony.
Powerful.
It's powerful. So you can actually tell a jury in closing statement, if you believe that she lied, and you put it up there and you go through the evidence and you show how she lied, and this is just one example of it. And then you show her text messages where she signed off in X's, where she's, and I think X's mean kiss. That's been my understanding of what X's mean. You show all these things, right, and then you show that she really just wanted to take control of this production. She wanted credit for it. She wanted it her way. She wanted the rewrites. And when she didn't get her way, she lashed out and said, I'm not going to show up. You portray her as badly as you can. And then you ask the jury to say, you saw her testify in this case. She asked for your sympathy multiple times. You are entitled to discount that. You're entitled to not even listen to what she has to say. Let's hear what all the other witnesses have to say about this. And it's devastating. And that's why Keith and I both believe this case needs to be dragged into a mediation. And they need to try to resolve this case, because it's going to get worse. And right now, Baldoni's winning, Zach, but you got to be concerned. You got these 3 HR complaints that you talked about. They may or may not be credible. But what about other things we don't know about yet? This is a very new case. And so if I was advising Baldoni, I would say, look, you have the leverage. Let's get this into a mediation. Let's get it resolved.
Yeah, while you have it.
Do you think there's any chance that he actually takes a settlement? Because Brian Friedman's made it clear that they want to go to trial. But I also know attorneys talk a big game to make it seem like they're entirely confident and have no fear moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think, settlement's always an option, no matter what attorneys say. And, we've heard it all at this point in our careers. That's why it's kind of funny to hear people say, like, you'll hear people say, well, we'll never settle. You'll hear people say, this is our last and final offer. Rarely true. And I did hear Friedman say that what Baldoni wants is he wants a determination that he was not a sexual predator. I don't know that he may want that. I think all clients want that, but that's not so easy to get. And as Stuart mentioned, juries can be fickle, and we don't know what else is coming. And there's other ways to address that through the form of a settlement. So, as impossible as it may seem, I think that Friedman certainly would, at some point, be willing to advise his client to settle. Of course, he would. He'd have to. And it just depends on the terms. It all just comes down to the terms. That's all it comes down to. So in my mind, it's not, can they settle? They can settle, but it's a matter of what are the terms going to be that they can each live with to be able to get out of this.
Zach, can I be boring for about 15 seconds here? And
yes,
that is,
do it.
The Cold War, it lasted a long time. And what ended it was a relationship between two very distrusting people at first, but they made a relationship with one another, Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev. And when they would get together, they would just talk. They would just have communication as human beings do, and they would get to know each other. And they had ups and downs. They had disagreements that went after they got together. But that human connection was so important. And I think right now you have two legal camps, Team Lively, Team Baldoni. Their orders are to kill each other. Their orders are to hurt each other, to harm each other. And as long as those are the orders, we're going to have a Cold War in this case. But the minute one or two members of those teams that are hopefully in leadership positions can get together out of the public's view and start talking about the case and start talking resolution, as hard as it may seem, if you can solve the Cold War, which was horrible and nobody thought the Cold War could be solved, by getting two people together and having them talk and see each other as human beings, you can do that in this case as well. It'll take away from the great stories that will continue to happen in this case, Zach. And by the way, I'm enjoying this. I've never really paid that close attention to pop culture, but this really is exciting to watch and listen to and learn the facts as they develop daily, sometimes by the hour. But these are human beings at the end of the day. These are real people. They're hurting. All of them are hurting. And somebody needs to stand up in both legal teams and say, how can we make a human connection here? How can we get together and at least start talking? We don't necessarily have to settle at day one, but let's start talking and working together.
Yeah.
I think Brian Friedman is a juggernaut, and I think he's prepared, whether it's, even if the HR complaint isn't real with the butt grabbing, which for context, it was an alleged allegation of, it's believed to be from the actress Jenny Slate, who played the sister, Baldoni's sister in the film. And the claim is that he tried to adjust her posture, and I guess in adjusting her posture had put his hands on her back and possibly her butt. She's claiming her butt. And so the issue here, though, is we also see in this HR complaint that it's stated that this incident happened on camera and in front of a bunch of other people. So I would imagine that can very easily be disputed, either pro Baldoni or pro the accuser, with the footage and with the other witnesses. And so I would imagine that whatever comes out, and Brian Friedman's probably prepared for this because they have access to all of the raw footage, because Baldoni's production company is the one that shot this entire movie. They have it all ready to go. And so whatever allegation comes out, I'm sure they're willing to drop another piece of evidence. And I predict that we will probably get more evidence published, more video evidence published this week that'll dispute whatever new claims come up. Because there's the birthing scene where Blake Lively claims that she wasn't fully covered, and then Baldoni's team has already come out and said that's not true. She was wearing black briefs and she had a fake pregnancy belly. There were a number of different coverings that she had that protected her from having to be too revealing in that scene, despite it being a more intimate scene because she's giving birth and her legs had to be open and spread. They claimed that she was still wearing black, and they were specific that they were black briefs. I would imagine they wouldn't make that allegation if they didn't have the footage that they can reveal that actually proves that allegation, which, if they can drop that and prove that claim is wrong, then I think, or that claim was inaccurate, then I think she really doesn't have a shot at this point. The first bit of footage really shot her in the foot. And I think whatever next piece of footage that comes out will be the kill shot. And they're probably ready and locked and loaded and ready to go.
Yeah. And I'll jump in here real quickly and just say, that trials are about credibility. Trials are about who's the honest broker. And the lawyer wants to be the one giving the jury the truth in opening in direct exam and cross exam and in closing, and they want their clients obviously to be honest brokers, and they want the witnesses that are favorable to them to also be honest brokers, because juries, and it's amazing to me how 9 people or 12 people put together that are not maybe the smartest people in the world. They're not, all engineers and lawyers and doctors, but they come from very varied backgrounds, and these juries are brighter than anybody in the room collectively. And when they go back and deliberate, they punish people for not being credible. And Zack, you've pointed out, you've done some very good coverage on this. And if everything's to be believed for the Baldoni team, there are serious credibility issues with Blake Lively. And again, she has an ulterior motive for all of this. And so if all of that's true, I think a jury will be very, very harsh on her.
Yeah,
because I also think
agree.
like they don't have a strong case as to why Baldoni would even want to launch this smear campaign against her. He had the rights to the second film, the sequel. It doesn't make sense that he wants to bury the lead actress and potentially kill his. I mean, if this was his big breakout film, It Ends With Us as a director, and he already had the rights to produce a sequel, and there were already plans that he wanted to move forward with the sequel. Should this film first be successful, then he, one, needs to make sure that this first film is successful, and two, he has no benefit of ruining Blake Lively's reputation, which is why throughout the promotion of the film, you see him only speak highly of Blake Lively, despite now seeing the photos of him in the basement sitting on the cases of Dasani water during the premiere. It just doesn't add up, when you logically kind of look at things objectively and try to be like, okay, well, what makes sense here? And so before I let you go, there are 2 other pieces of information that we've seen come to light. One is the voice note, and the second one are some of her text messages. But let's start with the voice note, where he, like we said, it sounds like he may be placating her, kind of just trying to appease her, make her happy, make it downplay any of her potential, reactions that could harm or delay production any further, because that was one of the claims, that like, they had to be very delicate and walk on eggshells around her. But this voice note that came out to him, which one they said it was inappropriate that he was sending this to her at 2 a.m., but it lacks the context that she had sent him a 1 a.m. text message first, and this was his response to it. It just happened to be at 2 a.m. But do you think that voice note, even though it was put out there by his team, do you think that hurts his case? My theory was that they could potentially twist it and say, oh, we'll see, he said that she was so difficult to work with on set, but yet in this voice note, you see him apologizing to her, and you see him trying to work with her, and it shows that it wasn't a contentious relationship, because, he seems to be just fine with her based off of the cadence of this voice note.
I mean, I think if you take all of the evidence in total, it is pretty clear that he is constantly being asked to apologize when there's no reason for him to apologize. He's being required to say things that maybe, he doesn't fully believe, but he has to do it in order to kind of keep her in the fold and keep her happy, because otherwise she gets very upset and she kind of starts making demands. So, I mean, I guess it's like anything else, if you were to take it out of context, and there were times when you're reading the text messages early on between Baldoni and Lively, when you're like, oh, these two seem to have a really great relationship, and maybe they did for a while. But then over time, you could see where that shifted, and, things changed. So I think when you put that into context, I think it all makes sense. And, at least that's the story that's told in the complaint and the attachments by Baldoni, and it seems convincing to me based on what I've seen there.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's unusual for somebody in the lesser powerful part of the relationship to placate somebody, especially when the issues here were so large. Could you finish a movie? What happens if Blake Lively really truly says, okay, I'm out, I'm not doing this?
Yeah, they're ruined.
They're ruined. Yeah. So I think they had to work with her the best they could. And I think that's what they're going to do, Zack, is her team is going to be pulling those out, showing them to the jury. But again, the jury is the smartest group in the room. The jury's going to look at that. They'll put context. It's not like Brian Friedman's going to sit by and just allow that to happen. He's going to layer in the rest of the context, that there was a text at 1 a.m. from Blake to Baldoni. And of course, Justin is responding to her as the best he can. And there's times here where he hurts her feelings. He's very blunt. Like I think when Taylor Swift apparently was at Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively's home, and Baldoni kind of felt like pressured on the script changes, right? And I guess he kind of snapped at her a little bit. But then again, he apologizes to her after the fact, saying, "I'm very sorry. I could have come off better there." And I think you're going to see Team Lively take that and put it in front of the jury, but they should be careful because it can come back to harm them and hurt them if they don't give the full story. Again, credibility is the key. And if you're not being credible as a lawyer, the jury's going to pick up on it immediately.
The other interesting piece is they've obviously released a number of text messages, Baldoni's team, where Blake released some text messages and then Baldoni said, all right, well, that was the Cliff Notes version. Here's the whole book. And they dropped a number of different text messages. The most incriminating that I've seen is Blake Lively. Well, one, the timeline of things, right? Because you see the timestamps of the text messages between the two of them. And then you also see when these allegations of harassment took place. And to me, if these harassment allegations, took place over the summer, and then we see a number of text messages throughout the duration of summer where you're seeing the XX text messages where she signs off XX, and you're seeing the banter can be really friendly, in some cases arguably flirty. We have the yummy and flirty text message where she references her love language and how she's a bit of a ball buster, but she never uses teeth, which people can read into and say that there may be some sexual innuendos that are being displayed there. And then you see his response where he immediately references his family. You can tell that he's very much trying to counter having that type of relationship with her. But I think to me, that's also another damning piece of evidence is the text messages don't line up with her timeline because it shows that they have a friendly relationship throughout the duration of when this harassment is taking place. And then just the nature of her text messages to him also don't feel entirely appropriate for somebody that is claiming to have been harassed by this man.
Yeah, and I think that shows the asymmetrical nature of the relationship, as Stewart's been pointing out. And that was the most bombastic thing to me when I was looking through the exhibits to Baldoni's lawsuit, is they would show this text was included, and then here's a whole page of this was all excluded, which is oh geez, that's a lot. That's a lot that they left out of their side of the story. And you could take any text conversation and pull out just a couple things and completely change the nature and the meaning of what's being said. I mean, in one instance, they actually took out an emoji that gave a text context that it was a joke in order to make it look like it wasn't a joke. Well, again, that goes back to Stewart's point on credibility. You are not going.
I don't remember the exact timeline on this, but I do know that Blake Lively was breastfeeding apparently at her trailer, and she invited Justin to come to her trailer alone. He was at lunch or something. Grabbing a bite to eat, and she said, "Hey, come over. I'm breastfeeding, but let's do lines." I'm assuming that meant lines.
Read
for,
lines.
Yeah.
There's a difference between reading lines and doing lines in Hollywood.
So that sounded horrible. But that's not something that somebody who's feeling sexually harassed, somebody that feels that they're a victim and there's somebody that's harming them. That's just generally not what they do. And so, again, when you take this all together, in circumstantial evidence, we pull everything together to show the whole picture. Well, here you not only have circumstantial evidence, you've got direct evidence with all of these text messages, and they tell a story. And Zach, I think you nailed it when you said this is the book, and they gave you the Cliff Notes. The Cliff Notes never justify what the true nature of the book is. And so when you read this, it literally is like reading a novel. And as you get to the end of it, you're just shocked that this is something that actually happened.
Well, that's what my high school English teacher told me. The Cliff Notes don't count. So,
listen, the Cliff Notes helped me get to the end of the semester. But in a lawsuit, you don't want to rely on the Cliff Notes. You want the unabridged, extended version, the director's cut and all. And it just, I don't know. To me, her credibility has been shot a number of times. The timeline of the text messages, the omission of the text messages, the footage that she has, the nature of the text messages. And now I know that part of the theory that's floating around publicly is that maybe these text messages aren't real, which to me can very easily be proven once you dig into the metadata. So I don't know. We'll have to wait to see how this all plays out. But you guys will need to come back again when we have more developments and see, do you think that this will go to trial? As of right now, we have just over a year before a trial.
I mean, I would give this maybe a 10% chance of going to trial. I don't think it goes to trial.
This case cannot go to trial.
Well, especially right now, what we know. Like, again,
Yeah.
if I was lawyer for Lively, I don't even want it being deposed, much
Yeah.
less going to trial. But
Yeah.
Well, we see
We'll
them.
see.
It appears they're already trying to delay that with fighting back with Friedman being the one that deposes her and then saying that they need an extension on their amended complaint. And now, there's just, it appears like there's a number of tactics that are, as you said, what was it? You can either pound the truth or the law. It seems like right now they're pounding the law.
Yeah.
Yep. Zack, this has really been fun, and we appreciate you having us on. And we're learning this as we're going. You are a master of the facts, and this is certainly a compelling story. And we're looking forward to your coverage as you continue putting it out.
Absolutely. Well, we'll get together again soon. You guys are in LA, right?
We're in San Diego.
Oh, okay. Maybe we'll coordinate and get you guys to come into our studio at Spotify and we can tape something in person. That would be fun. Maybe as we get more pieces and there's not an amended complaint that we're on the edge of our seat waiting to dig into, but we have a bit more of a concrete evidence. But thank you both for coming on the podcast. I appreciate you, and we'll stay in touch.
All right. Thanks,
All right, Zack. Take care.
Thanks, guys.